While Houston was booming in the 1970s, its football team was not. The Houston Oilers were coming off a pair of 1-13 seasons when they hired an unconventional head coach. O.A. Bum Phillips blended a quotable cowboy charm with a family-first approach to team building. He didn't scream at his players like other coaches, and he revolutionized NFL defensive schemes in ways we still use today. It worked. Bum transformed the Oilers into an NFL powerhouse that challenged the vaunted Pittsburgh Steelers teams of that era. Along the way, the team captured the hearts of fans whose mantra was Luv Ya Blue, a reference to the Oilers' signature powder blue uniforms. The Oilers left Houston for Tennessee in 1996, and Phillips died in 2013, so newer and younger Houstonians don't really know much about Bum and the Oilers of that era. That's part of what prompted a new documentary. It's called Luv Ya Bum. Vance Howard from Huntsville-based Lucky No. 8 Productions, the film's executive producer, tells Houston Matters Michael Hagerty why Bum Phillips should be remembered more.
He took a really losing franchise and turned it into a winning franchise. And when Bud Adams hired him, he was actually one of the better defensive coordinators in the league, and he moved him up to head coach, which was kind of interesting because he didn't start out as a head coach. But, of course, he had coached in other places like Nederland and other places around the state. And he took a bunch of C and B players and turned them into A players and turned them into a winning franchise.
Yeah, they were pretty awful when he took over.
They were pretty bad. They weren't winning very
couple of
games.
One-win seasons in a row.
But it was interesting how Bum coached, though, Michael, is that when you look at the way he did it, he did it through inspiration and encouragement. He didn't belittle people. He communicated with people because these are grown men. These are professional athletes, and he treated them as such. And they really rose up to the occasion because he created more of a family atmosphere than he did just a team that's paid money to go tackle and pass the ball and catch the ball, et cetera, et cetera. So he was a very unique individual. And a funny thing is when you look at the top 10 people in Texas Monthly, the top 10 people they know, you got Sam Houston, you got Stephen F. Austin, et cetera. Number 6 is Bum Phillips. He's a Texas legend.
One of the things that really surprised me and stood out to me, I mean, if you know a little bit about Bum Phillips, he's this cowboy. He's a Texas good old boy, and it's easy. And, of course, the football stuff, it's easy to decide that you know who he is based on that surface stuff and some of the famous sound bites, but as this kind of tough character or something. But actually, how much time you spent on him as a person and as a coach that he wanted to actually create this family atmosphere. Can you talk about what he did to do that? He was not the coach that you maybe think, and he was atypical in that time.
Yeah, I think too, Michael Berry talks about it a little bit because he was interviewed and he kind of looked into the family history. In World War II, Bum Phillips was on kind of the front lines and he saw a lot of not so nice stuff that people see in war. And he always said, he didn't understand why a drill sergeant felt the need to yell at him. He knew what to do if you just told him. He was a soldier. And he said when he brought that into coaching, that he didn't think he needed to yell at a professional athlete to get his point across. He could communicate with them in a professional and polite way, in an encouraging way, an uplifting way. And I think that made him a really special coach. And he would also host during training season, he would host Family Day. And he would have the wives, the spouses, the friends, their kids, their dog all come out. And it would be a light practice, not a hard hitting practice, where they were all building camaraderie. They were building relationships. And Bum Phillips always said, people will fight harder for their family than they will anybody else. And that's the environment he created. And I think that's one reason he took a bunch of D and C players and turned them into A's.
Yeah, there's a lot of clips and a lot of interviews where people are asking about that approach and saying, like, this isn't normal or typical in the NFL. Is this going to work? And it really did seem to bring the team together.
Yeah, it's very encouraging, very exciting. And I think in the documentary, you've seen it, and I know you were giving me some great compliments on it. Thank you very much. You saw in the documentary how you feel as a viewer watching a coach uplift a whole town. He uplifted a whole city. And I think that's pretty inspirational also, too. I think it's just a wonderful story about a character, about hard work, about dedication, about supporting your fellow teammates, about being just a good person. And you can create great things by being a good person. I think Bum really amplified that. And I think that's a great story. I think the Phillips family continues to carry that tradition on. Wes Phillips and Wade Phillips, both of them are great coaches. Both of them have Super Bowl rings. It's a really great family story.
And a lot of people thought that this isn't going to work, this approach, and he made that team so good, and the fan base was so starving for it with those really bad teams, and all of a sudden they're one of the most dominant teams in the league, and that created that Luv Ya Blue, which is the play on which your film is named Luv Ya Bum. It's a play on that. How like ferocious were the fans, and how much did they love Bum and what he did with his team? What did it mean to the city?
That is such a great question because, when he took over the team, they were losing. He turned them into a winning team. When he lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I can remember he was interviewed and he was talking about how he had promised the city that he would come to the Astrodome. And he didn't want to. They had lost, but he was like, we told them we're going to be there. We're going. We lost and we've been beaten and we're upset. We're hurt. And the whole town came out. They filled up the Astrodome and around the Astrodome to where you couldn't get in the Astrodome, and people were beeping their horns and they were excited. And it's like he said, they came out for a loss because he had created that dynamic feeling of euphoria inside of Houston, Texas, where they loved that team. They loved how hard they played, and even if they lost, they were going to stand behind them. And I think that says a lot about Houston too.
Yeah. Houston in the 70s and early 80s. I mean, that was a booming economy. A lot was happening. The Mickey Gilley urban cowboy scene and the growth and everything there. And I've always said that Houston fans, man, they're starving for a winner. And when there's a winner, they're going to love you in a way that maybe other cities don't. And I think you see that when a lot of players end up retiring here and spending their lives after their careers here when they maybe not are from here.
That's true. And so that's been a really interesting part of the film. And part of the films that we want to tell at my production company is uplifting, educational, and inspirational. This one definitely fits the mold. But an interesting thing too, instant replay is in effect now. But did you know instant replay was mainly off of that catch that the receiver caught in the end zone playing the Pittsburgh Steelers that was clearly in when you looked at the instant replay, but they had to call it on the field back in that time. That day, Mike Renfro was the receiver. He was clearly in, and they didn't get, and it didn't cost them the game, but it definitely hurt them in that game against Pittsburgh. But that was the very, very beginning of when they said, hey, we need to look at instant replay.
And that is a good reminder. Not only did that time and that play change the NFL eventually, but I mean, Bum Phillips, known for his personality in a lot of ways, and Houstonians, their rabid love for him back then. But I mean, he actually had some innovations. He changed the way football was played. Can you explain that?
He changed the defense and the way they play defense now, which is still in effect now. It's been used, and so his defensive scheme is still a lot of the teams use that today. So he was always very innovative. And you got to remember too, Ray Phillips has been defensive coordinator for like the Denver Broncos when they took him to the Super Bowl. He's one of the best defensive coordinators that's ever been in the league. He'll probably be in the Hall of Fame. And he learned a lot of that from his dad, Bum. And then you look at Wes Phillips, who actually went to the other side. I've been around him when they tease each other about going to the dark side. He's an offensive coordinator. So, but you know what? Who better to learn how to run an offense than your dad, who's probably one of the best defensive coordinators that's ever been in the NFL.
Right. Learn what they're doing, how they're doing it, how to beat them, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about his football, Bum, his football innovations and what he did creating a family environment with the team. But the thing that maybe is easy to stand out about him is his personality, the sound bites and different things that we remember all these years later. Talk about that and what he's kind of remembered for moments in his life, in his football life.
He would always have those one-liners that pretty much made everybody laugh. One of his more famous ones, when he was on Johnny Carson, and and Bud Adams had terminated his employment there, and he made the comment to Johnny Carson. He said, "Well, there's those coaches that have been fired, and those coaches that have been fired, those coaches that will be fired." And if you look at coaching in the NFL, it was a true statement, but it was also a very humorous way to look at it. Coaches don't last real long in the NFL, and that's just the way it is. But he, what I loved about Bum Phillips, and when he was terminated by Bud Adams, he didn't say a derogatory thing about Bud. He came back and he said, it's his team, his prerogative. It is what it is. He can do what he will. And I think that people can learn a lot from that attitude. That, he made a comment on Johnny Carson too. He goes, look, I'll find another job. If you've got talent, you'll go find another job. And he had talent and he did. He went with New Orleans Saints, and then he came back and wanted to be a rancher, and he was.
And that's a good reminder that he was not only a big character and figure in Houston, but as the team got better and became a national powerhouse up there with the Pittsburgh Steelers of the time, I mean, that he was a national celebrity. He was on Johnny Carson, for Pete's sake. I mean, he was larger than life.
He was larger than life, and he was always a good person to have on a show like that because he was so humorous and he had such a good sense of humor. But he was always positive. He never was a negative person. And I think that was a big part of the Houston's success, the Oilers' success, is his positive attitude and the way he sort of projected that on his players, and it made them really gel as a team.
One other line, a couple lines that stand out. He said something about next year we're going to, last year we knocked on the door, next year we're kicking it in, that sort of something to that. But the other one I always loved was someone criticizing running back Earl Campbell's time in the mile. And he said, next time it's 4th and a mile, I won't put him in or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Give the ball to somebody else.
That's right. He had some really good humor about that. And he's like, so what if Earl's not fast on the 100-yard dash, but he can get you that 1 yard every time, and he'll get you, a lot of yardage. And so I loved how he would project that good atmosphere and that humor into somebody trying to pull in negativity, and he would divert it into something positive.
And that's when that team really seemed to take off, turn the jets on. I mean, when Earl Campbell arrives and he's just making 80-yard touchdown runs and things like that. Unfortunately, they were so good, but they could never get over that hump that was such a juggernaut Pittsburgh Steelers team, could they?
And let's face it, Pittsburgh had a great team. I mean, you had the Steel Curtain, you had Terry Bradshaw, you had Lynn Swann, you just had some players on there. I mean, they just were loaded with Hall of Famers. So they were tough. They were probably the best team in that day and age, them and the Cowboys. And, so they had just some great players. But you got to give Bum credit. He took a lot of C and B players and almost beat them.
Yeah. What do you think Bum Phillips' legacy is now? How he's remembered all these years later? A lot of people in Houston may live here, may not know him or be as aware of him. But what stands out about him and his legacy and how he affected both the city and the game of football?
I think his legacy is going to live on. And that's one reason this documentary, I think, is fun to watch. We've shown this documentary to a number of coaches. Just showed it to Phil Longo, who's the coach of St. Eastern State University. He showed it to all his players because he wanted to show them. He tries to coach that way too. Phil Longo does here at St. Eastern State University, and he tries to motivate through, being a promoter, being an encourager, not being somebody that beats on people. And I think that is a great motivating factor. And I think as more people learn about Bum Phillips who may not know about him, if you look at our age group, 50 or above, everybody knows Bum Phillips in Houston. But if the younger people may not, and I think that a lot of younger coaches, a lot of players, a lot of citizens themselves can watch from a person who led through being good, being a good, gentle person with a good sense of humor. Now, look, he wasn't all that easy on his players. He coached hard, and he demanded X amount of, he had expectations, but he also did it in a very genuine way.
Vance Howard is the executive producer of Luv Ya Bum, a documentary streaming on Amazon Prime about the 1970s-era Houston Oilers coach Bum Phillips. Howard spoke with Michael Hagerty.